When day turns to night, and the moon is most bright, shed the king of you and wear the queen. The 9 realms will open and your magic be free. Hi, my bling. It's your favorite drag witch, Nova Jupiter Jenkins. My friends call me Nova JJ, and you can too. If you're just joining us, I'd recommend jumping back and listening to previous episodes to get caught up on the sitch with this witch. But here's the short version. My alter ego Adam casts a spell every full and new moon, and is transported to a magical realm I call the Heath. And as he's transported, he's transformed into me, renowned book hunter and witch extraordinaire, Nova JJ. I record a podcast while I person the information desk at a library of infinite size called Kalamudutu. Occasionally I'm joined by my half-raven, half-feline familiars, Hugo and Munzie. Welcome to the Swollen Moon episode. This moon gets its name from a couple different sources. Because it's spring and a lot of ice at higher altitudes has been melting, the rivers and waterways are swollen with extra water. There's a tribe of griffins called the who believe that the moon is a pool that is filled with light after the melting of cosmic ice. The other source for the name, swollen, is because this time of year is a time when beings become swollen with desire and lust, and their bodies, or specific parts of their bodies, become swollen with vital fluids. I didn't mention it during the last episode because I was so distracted by the recounting of my zombie fun times, but one of the important festivals in the witch's calendar had recently passed, and that was Beltane. I missed it here because it didn't fall on either the new or full moon, but Adam celebrated in his own way. Beltane falls on the opposite side of the wheel of the year from Samhain, and is sort of a mirror. Samhain honors and celebrates the dead, and Beltane honors and celebrates life, which includes sexy times. I myself am not really into sexy times, which a lot of people have a hard time understanding because of how gorgeous I am, but it's true. For me, Beltane is about celebrating the fertility of the mind. It's a great time for new ideas and beginning new endeavors in general. So before we jump into Craft Corner, I wanted to follow up on something from last episode. When we were discussing naming day for the ghosts of Kalamudutu, I talked about how, when she was alive, Gulia's body didn't match her gender identity. Gulia wanted me to elaborate a little on her situation. She didn't feel she was in a position to come out or take any action to change her body, so she lived as the gender other people assumed she was based on her body. There's no way to know for sure, but she believes that this led to the hypertension and stress that ultimately proved her demise. The main reason Gulia wanted me to mention this was a way of saying, if you're going through something similar, she encourages you to take advantage of the helplines and resources that didn't exist when she was alive. There's a trans-led organization called Trans Lifeline, dedicated to saving and improving the quality of trans lives. They can be reached in Canada at 1-877-330-6366, or in the US at 1-877-565-8860. Okay, so for Craft Corner this moon, I wanted to talk about an aspect of yarn craft that's important to a lot of yarn crafters, and that's charity crafting. I can't speak for everyone, of course, but I think for many of us, we feel we've been given this gift of being able to take some yarn and a couple of sticks or a hook or even a loom and shuttle, and turning out a beautiful piece of useful art. And part of enjoying that gift is giving back, whether it's to friends and family or to those in need. I'm currently crocheting a blanket that I hope to donate to the Association of Registered Retired Gnome Healers, or ARG for short. Just to clarify, they are gnomes who heal, not people who heal gnomes, although they also heal gnomes. Anyway, hopefully they'll be able to raffle off the blanket to raise funds for their new community garden. Because it's to help raise funds for a garden, I've designed the blanket to use a flower motif, but the yarn is spun together with regular wool combined with unicorn tail hair, so it changes its color theme to match the decor of the room it's placed in. If anyone out there is working on a charity project, I'd love to hear what you're working on. Don't mind some of those sounds, it's just Hugo and Munzie getting comfortable. Okay, Munzie, figure it out. Alright, so for story time, we are going to be continuing with the Black Amazon of Mars. In the last episode, the warning that our hero, Eric John Stark, had given to the Martian city of Kushat about the impending attack of the wolves of Mech proved to be true, and the besieged city was not able to hold its gate against the wolves. Stark confronted the leader of the wolves, the hated Lord Ciaran who had him tortured for the location of the talisman of Ban Cruach, the founder of the city of Kushat, which he'd been given by his friend Kamar right before Kamar's death. Stark managed to pull off the black mask that Lord Ciaran never removed, and discovered why. A woman! And in that moment of amazement she was quicker than he. There was nothing to warn him, no least flicker of expression. Her 2 fists came up together between his outstretched arms and caught him under the jaw with a force that nearly snapped his neck. He went backward, clean out of the saddle, and lay sprawled on the bloody stones, half stunned, the wind knocked out of him. The woman wheeled her mount. Bending low, she took up the axe from where it had fallen and faced her warriors, who were as dazed as Stark. "I have led you well," she said. "I have taken you Kushat. Will any man dispute me?" They knew the axe if they did not know her. They looked from side to side uneasily, completely at a loss, and Stark, still gasping on the ground, thought that he had never seen anything as proud and beautiful as she was then in her black mail, with her bright hair blowing and her glance like blue lightning. The nobles of Kushat chose that moment to charge. The strange unmasking of the Meckish lord had given them time to rally, and now they thought that the gods had wrought a miracle to help them. They found hope where they had lost everything but courage. "A wench!" they cried. "A strumpet of the camps! A woman!" They howled it like an epithet and tore into the barbarians. She who had been the Lord Ciaran drove the spurs in deep, so that the beast leaped forward screaming. She went and did not look to see if any had followed, in among the men of Kushat, and the great axe rose and fell and rose again. She killed 3 and left 2 others bleeding on the stones, and not once did she look back. The clansmen found their tongues. "Ciaran! Ciaran!" The crashing shout drowned out the sound of battle. As one man they turned and followed her. Stark, scrambling for his life underfoot, could not forbear smiling. Their childlike minds could see only 2 alternatives, to slay her out of hand or to worship her. They had chosen to worship. He thought the bards would be singing of the Lord Ciaran of Mech as long as there were men to listen. He managed to take cover behind a wrecked booth and presently make his way out of the square. They had forgotten him for the moment. He did not wish to wait just then until they, or she, remembered. She. He still did not believe it, quite. He touched the bruise under his jaw where she had struck him, and thought of the lithe, swift strength of her, and the way she had ridden alone into battle. He remembered the death of Thord and how she had kept her red wolves tamed, and he was filled with wonder and a deep excitement. He remembered what she had said to him once. "We are of one blood, though we be strangers." He laughed silently, and his eyes were very bright. The tide of war had rolled on toward the king's city, where from the sound of it there was hot fighting around the castle. Eddies of the main struggle swept shrieking through the streets, but the rat runs under the wall were clear. Everyone had stampeded inward, the victims with the victors close on their heels. The short northern day was almost gone. He found a hiding place that offered reasonable safety and settled himself to wait. Night came, but he did not move. From the sounds that reached him, the sacking of Kushat was in full swing. They were looting the richer streets first. The upraised voices were thick with wine and mingled with the cries of women. The reflection of many fires tinged the sky. By midnight the sounds began to slacken, and by the 2nd hour the city slept, drugged with wine and blood and the weariness of battle. Stark went silently out into the streets toward the king's city. According to the immemorial pattern of Martian city-states, the castles of the king and the noble families were clustered together in a solitary grandeur. Many of the towers were fallen now, the great halls open to the sky. Time had crushed the grandeur that had been Kushat more fatally than the boots of any conqueror. In the house of the king the flamboys guttered low, and the chieftains of Mech slept with their weary pipers among the benches of the banquet hall. In the niches of the tall, carved portal the guards nodded over their spears. They too had fought that day. Even so, Stark did not go near them. Shivering slightly in the bitter wind, he followed the bulk of the massive walls until he found a postern door, half open as some kitchen knave had left it in his flight. Stark entered, moving like a shadow. The passageway was empty, dimly lighted by a single torch. A stairway branched off from it, and he climbed that, picking his way by guess and his memories of similar castles he had seen in the past. He emerged into a narrow hall, obviously for the use of servants. A tapestry closed the end, stirring in the chill draught that blew along the door. He peered around it and saw a massive vaulted corridor, the stone walls panelled in wood much split and blackened by time, but still showing forth the wonderful carvings of beasts and men, larger than life and overlaid with gold and bright enamel. From the corridor a single doorway opened, and Otar slept before it, curled on a pallet like a dog. Stark went back down the narrow hall. He was sure that there must be a back entrance to the king's chambers, and he found the little door he was looking for. From there on was darkness. He felt his way, stepping with infinite caution, and presently there was a faint gleam of light filtering around the edges of another curtain of heavy tapestry. He crept toward it and heard a man's slow breathing on the other side. He drew the curtain back a careful inch. The man was sprawled on a bench athwart the door. He slept the honest sleep of exhaustion, his sword in his hand, the stains of his day's work still upon him. He was alone in the small room. A door in the farther wall was closed. Stark hit him and caught the sword before it fell. The man grunted once and became utterly relaxed. Stark bound him with his own harness and shoved a gag in his mouth and went on, through the door in the opposite wall. The room beyond was large and high and full of shadows. A fire burned low on the hearth, and the uncertain light showed dimly the hangings and the rich stuffs that carpeted the floor, and the dark, sparse shapes of furniture. Stark made out the lattice-work of a covered bed, let into the wall after the northern fashion. She was there, sleeping, her red-gold hair the colour of the flames. He stood a moment, watching her, and then, as though she sensed his presence, she stirred and opened her eyes. She did not cry out. He had known that she would not. There was no fear in her. She said with a kind of wry humour, "I will have a word with my guards about this." She flung aside the covering and rose. She was almost as tall as he, white-skinned and very straight. He noted the long thighs, the narrow loins and magnificent shoulders, the small virginal breasts. She moved as a man moves, without coquetry. A long furred gown that Stark guessed had lately graced the shoulders of the king lay over a chair. She put it on. "Well, wild man?" "I have come to warn you." He hesitated over her name, and she said, "My mother named me Sierra, if that seems better to you." She gave him the falcon's glance. "I could have slain you in the square, but now I think you did me a service. The truth would have come out sometime, better then when they had no time to think about it." She laughed. "They will follow me now, over the edge of the world, if I ask them." Stark said slowly, "Even beyond the gates of death?" "Certainly there, above all, there." She turned to one of the tall windows and looked out at the cliffs and the high notch of the pass, touched with greenish silver by the little moons. "Ban Cruach was a great king. He came out of nowhere to rule the Norlands with a rod of iron, and men speak of him still as half a god. Where did he get his power, if not from beyond the gates of death? Why did he go back there at the end of his days, if not to hide away his secret? Why did he build Kushat to guard the pass forever, if not to hoard that power out of reach of all the other nations of Mars? Yes, Stark, my men will follow me, and if they do not, I will go alone." "You are not Ban Cruach, nor am I." He took her by the shoulders. "Listen, Sierra, you're already king in the Norlands, and half a legend as you stand. Be content." "Content!" Her face was close to his, and he saw the blaze of it, the white intensity of ambition and iron pride. "Are you content?" she asked him. "Have you ever been content?" He smiled. "For strangers we do know each other well. No, but the spurs are not so deep in me." "The wind and the fire. One spends its strength in wandering, the other devours. But one can help the other. I made you an offer once, and you said you would not bargain unless you could look into my eyes. Look now." He did, and his hands upon her shoulders trembled. "No," he said harshly. "You're a fool, Sierra. Would you be as Otar mad with what you have seen?" Otar's an old man, and likely crazed before he crossed the mountains. Besides, I am not Otar. Stark said somberly, Even the bravest may break. Ban Cruach himself. She must have seen the shadow of that horror in his eyes, for he felt her body tense. What of Ban Cruach? What do you know, Stark? Tell me. He was silent, and she went from him angrily. You have the talisman, she said. That I am sure of. And if need be, I will flay you alive to get it. She faced him across the room. But whether I get it or not, I will go through the gates of death. I must wait now until after the thaw. The warm wind will blow soon, and the gorges will be running full. But afterward I will go, and no talk of fears and demons will stop me. She began to pace the room with long strides, and the full skirts of the gown made a subtle whispering about her. You do not know, she said in a low and bitter voice. I was a girl child without a name. By the time I could walk, I was a servant in the house of my grandfather. The two things that kept me living were pride and hate. I left the scrubbing of floors to practice arms with the young boys. I was beaten for it every day, but every day I went. I knew even then that only force would free me. And my father was a king's son, a good man of his hands. His blood was strong in me. I learned. She held her head very high. She had earned the right to hold it so. She finished quietly. I have come a long way. I will not turn back now. Sierra. Stark came and stood before her. I am talking to you as a fighting man, an equal. There may be power behind the gates of death, I do not know. But this I have seen, madness, horror, and evil that is beyond our understanding. I think you will not accuse me of cowardice, and yet I would not go into that pass for all the power of all the kings of Mars. Once started, he could not stop. The full force of that dark vision of the talisman swept over him again in memory. He came closer to her, driven by the need to make her understand. Sierra. Stark came and stood before her. I am talking to you as a fighting man, an equal. There may be power beyond the gates of death, I do not know, but this I have seen, madness, horror, and evil that is beyond our understanding. I think you will not accuse me of cowardice, and yet I would not go into that pass for all the power of all the kings of Mars. Once started, he could not stop. The full force of that dark vision of the talisman swept over him again in memory. He came closer to her, driven by the need to make her understand. Yes, I have the talisman, and I have had a taste of its purpose. I think Ban Cruach left it as a warning, so that none would follow him. I have seen the temples and the palaces glitter in the ice. I have seen the gates of death, not with my own eyes, Sierra, but with his, with the eyes and the memories of Ban Cruach. He had caught her again, his hand strong on her arms. Will you believe me, or must you see for yourself? The dreadful things that walk those buried streets, the shapes that rise from nowhere in the mists of the pass. Her gaze burned into his. Her breath was hot and sweet upon his lips, and she was like a sword between his hands, shining and unafraid. Give me the talisman. Let me see. He answered furiously. You are mad as Otar. And he kissed her, in a rage and a panic lest all that beauty be destroyed, a kiss as brutal as a blow that left him shaken. She backed away slowly, one step, and he thought she would have killed him. He said heavily, If you will see, you will. The thing is here. He opened the boss and laid the crystal in her outstretched hand. He did not meet her eyes. Sit down. Hold the flat side against your brow. She sat in a great chair of carven wood. Stark noticed that her hand was unsteady, her face the color of white ash. He was glad she did not have the axe where she could reach it. She did not play at anger. For a long moment she studied the intricate lens, the incredible depository of a man's mind. Then she raised it slowly to her forehead. He saw her grow rigid in the chair. How long he watched beside her he never knew. Seconds, an eternity. He saw her eyes turn black and strange, and a shadow came into her face, changing it subtly, altering the lines, so that it seemed almost a stranger was peering through her flesh. All at once, in a voice that was not her own, she cried out terribly, Oh, gods of Mars! The talisman dropped, rolling to the floor, and Sierra fell forward into Stark's arms. He thought at first that she was dead. He carried her to the bed in an agony of fear that surprised him with its violence, and laid her down, and put his hand over her heart. It was beating strongly. Relief that was almost a sickness swept over him. He turned, searching vaguely for wine, and saw the talisman. He picked it up and put it back inside the boss. A jeweled flagon stood on a table across the room. He took it and started back, and then abruptly there was a wild clamor in the hall outside, and Otar was shouting Sierra's name, pounding on the door. It was not barred. In another moment they would burst through, and he knew that they would not stop to inquire what he was doing there. He dropped the flagon and went out swiftly the way he had come. The guard was still unconscious. In the narrow hall beyond, Stark hesitated. A woman's voice was rising high above the tumult in the main corridor, and he thought he recognized it. He went to the tapestry curtain and looked for the second time around its edge. The lofty space was full of men, newly wakened from their heavy sleep and as nervous as so many bears. Thanis struggled in the grip of two of them. Her scarlet kirtle was torn, her hair flying in wild elf locks, and her face was the face of a mad thing. The whole story of the doom of Kushat was written large upon it. "Tell her, the witch that leads you, tell her that she is already doomed to death with all of her army." Otar opened the door of Sierra's room. Thanis surged forward. She must have fled through all that castle before she was caught, and Stark's heart ached for her. "You!" she shrieked through the doorway and poured out all the filth of the quarter upon Sierra's name. "Balin has gone to bring doom upon you. He will open wide the gates of death, and then you will die, die, die." Stark felt the shock of a terrible dread as he let the curtain fall. Mad with hatred against conquerors, Balin had fulfilled his raging promise and had gone to fling open the gates of death. Remembering his nightmare vision of the shining evil ones whom Ban Kuak had long ago prisoned beyond those gates, Stark felt a sickness grow within him as he went down the stair and out the postern door. It was almost dawn. He looked up at the brooding cliffs, and it seemed to him that the wind in the pass had a sound of laughter that mocked his growing dread. He knew what he must do, if an ancient mysterious horror was not to be released upon Kushat. "I may still catch Balin before he has gone too far. If I don't—" He dared not think of that. He began to walk very slowly through the night streets toward the distant, towering gates of death. Alright, stay tuned for the continuing saga of the Black Amazon of Mars. And now it's tarot time. On a previous episode, I mentioned that for myself, I tend to do rune readings instead of tarot readings, but this moon I'm going to do a tarot reading regarding my upcoming attempt to hunt down and deal with these pesky attackers once and for all. Sometimes a different perspective can be just the thing you need. So the spread I'm going to do today is a little different from most spreads in that it has what we call a variable layout, which means that the layout can change depending on who or what the reading is for. Since I determined during the zombie attack that I have two enemies, I'll be pulling a card for myself, 2 cards for them, as well as cards for our allies and obstacles. So first up is me, of course. So the card coming up is the High Priest, which signifies that I am a teacher of greater awareness. Well, I'm certainly going to teach those two a lesson, so that's appropriate. And next comes my allies. And we have the Chariot. This is a card of departure and deliberate action. And in certain decks, like the one I'm using now, this card is also associated with the goddess Freya, who, if you remember, is the reason I'm here. I have an idea what that might signify, but let's see what obstacles lay in my path that my enemies could exploit. 3 of Cups. Overflowing happiness, celebrating, copious creativity. Well, I guess it's possible that I let the Ostara celebrations keep me from pursuing my enemies, and I haven't been taking them terribly seriously. But, I mean, who can take someone seriously when they use tacky zombies? Okay, card for enemy number 1. The 10 of Cups. Cups represent water, and this card represents the achievement of goals and dreams, renewed familial ties and friendships. Oh gosh, that doesn't sound good. Okay, card for enemy number 2. The King of Wands, a fiery and charismatic leader. I'll bet. Alright, now they're allies. The Four of Swords, recovery after conflict. I guess maybe I did leave them alone a little too long. Alright, and lastly, their obstacles. The Emperor. This card represents a father figure who creates order and structure. Whose father, though? That wasn't something I'd considered before. Oh, I have to run, my bling. Remember to like, rate, and subscribe on Stitcher, Google Play, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Tell a friend, tell a stranger, whisper it creepily to yourself in line at the grocery store, or shout it crazily on the bus. And remember, not only should people who live in glass houses not throw stones, stones who live in people houses shouldn't throw glass. Bye.